Data is, in some senses, I think it touches on many different things. As a researcher and as an academic, obviously data is the kind of bedrock on which everything that I do depends. We can't do research, do analysis, understand patterns of poverty and inequality unless we have the numbers there to show us what's going on. And as researchers, of course, we hope that the work that we do will then lead to some changes, that governments will do something different as a result of the research that we've done. But to understand the problem, we first have to have the numbers to really paint the picture of what it is. Well, the data revolution means many, many different things to different people, which I suspect is one of the reasons why it's such a popular term. But I think for me, it means two things. On the one hand, it means a huge increase in the amount of data. So we're not just seeing data that researchers have been working with for years, the kind of data that comes from household surveys or from censuses. Suddenly we have this explosion in different kinds of data. So we can now look at data that comes from mobile phone records. We can look at data that comes from trying to understand a little bit more what people think, as well as what they have and what they do. We can look at qualitative data that's coming out of all kinds of patterns, what people are talking about, what people say in groups, and so on. So we have an explosion on the supply side of data. The data revolution, though, is about much more than that. It's not about creating more data that can just sit in offices. It's about a huge increase in interest in the use of data, in people wanting to have access to more data, in governments more and more understanding what some of these new data sources can do for them. But even more than that, it's about citizens, it's about non-governmental organizations, and it's about the private sector really becoming much more aware of how they can use data to improve the kinds of things that they do. I think there is so many different ways, some very small, some very big. But the thing that I think has been most concerning myself and my colleagues at the ODI in recent months is about where data can help to improve government policy making. So if, for example, a government is trying to improve the delivery of health services to citizens, it wants to perhaps increase its coverage of universal health care, or start a government-funded health care service where none existed, it's very difficult for a government to do that if it doesn't know where people live, if it doesn't know where the sickest people in the society actually are, if it doesn't know when people are born and when people die. So it's absolutely essential that governments have the data that they need, in the form that they need, in the time that they need, in order to really be able to do the things that people want them to do and improve people's lives. The core findings of the report really focus in this area of what governments can do. I think, first of all, we are illustrating some of the gaps in the data that we use, and perhaps one of the most striking findings of the report, was certainly a surprise to some of us when we were doing it, was how shaky some of the numbers that we use every day without even thinking about it are. So, for example, if you take the figure of the number of people in the world who live on below $1.25 a day, which is taken as the kind of standard number to express the depth of the problem of poverty in the world, we found that that number is mostly based on household surveys. Now, as the name suggests, a survey of a household is excluding people who don't live in what we see as households, people who are in prison, people who are homeless. And when you add up all the different categories of people who are excluded from household surveys, you come to a figure of something around 350 million people. So potentially our numbers, the most basic numbers that we use to try to understand the world, could be out by a factor of even as much as 25%. I think the challenges, there are many challenges that we face. Some of them are the old challenges that we haven't solved yet. So these same problems of data gaps, of too much of the data that we rely on being unreliable, being not as accurate as we would like it to be. And these are problems that governments have confronted for decades. and a lot of them we haven't solved yet. We kind of know how to do it. We need more resources, we need more expertise, and we just need a lot more political energy to go into trying to solve these problems. I think there is a whole new kind of problem as well, which is being thrown up by some of the new ways that we're collecting and using data. Something that we've been talking about here at the Data Festival over the last day or so has been the question of privacy and data rights. And how much do we need to be concerned about how these new forms of data are potentially harmful as well as beneficial to people? I think for many reasons, partly because simply bringing people together starts off a whole set of conversations and ideas that you could never predict and that would not have happened had you not had that particular collection of people together in a room at a particular time. But I think there is a particular issue around data in that this world often tends to operate in quite specific groups that often don't talk to each other. So the statisticians who work so hard in governments to provide the accurate data on which policy making depends are often not talking to those people in the private sector who are developing the algorithms to crunch some of these huge new data sources, which potentially, if those two groups talk to each other, you could find all kinds of ways that they could help each other, that they could improve, solve some of these old problems, solve some of the new problems. So it's partly about bringing together some of these different groups that don't talk to each other. There's no sort of institutional way yet within the data community for those groups to talk to each other. So events like this that bring people together are particularly important at this moment.